This is 14-year-old me, 100% convinced that I will become a scientist. This is 20-something-year-old me, 100% convinced that the biggest discovery of my work will be finding a drug target or a molecule to treat heart disease. And this is 30-something-year-old me, accepting the fact that for a happy heart, there's something more important than any signaling molecule, ending the war within us. In this war, we have an enemy with some very special features. It's only visible to us, so we are fighting this war completely on our own. It only gets bigger and creepier until we do something about it, and most importantly, it burdens our heart without us even realizing. But before we go and talk about who this enemy really is and how to win this war, I want to go back to where this story started. And for me, everything starts and ends with the heart. So one of the first things that I learned as a heart researcher is that our heart is really powerful. It pumps 100 times a day, 8,000 liters of blood, which is enough to fill a small tanker truck every single day. But then on the other hand, failing of this incredible machine is the #1 cause of death for those above 60, meaning that for its proper work, our heart needs proper bodily biochemistry. And in my quest to understand what that means, I learned early on something that's super hard to test in the lab. And that's that our complex and sometimes complicated emotions play a huge role in this. So one of scientifically undeniable evidence for that is the broken heart or Takotsubo syndrome, in which our strong emotions alone can stun our heart to the same degree as if a 300-pound boxer punches us in the chest. And while this is rare, more and more research is showing that even moderate negative emotions have strong effect on our heart. And one very funny study that demonstrated that, which I'm going to present also here, was there to test whether two very common emotions, shame and anger, can affect our heart function when we are under stress. So to do that, researchers from Pittsburgh and San Francisco gathered some volunteers and then first they stressed them. And they did that by giving them a very difficult math test to solve, which went like this. They get a random 5-digit number, and then they're supposed to count backwards in 7 or 13s as long as they can. You can try. It's not easy. So when they were stressed enough, they were divided into 3 different groups. If they were lucky, they landed in the control group, where they could perform this test alone in the room, and they received no feedback to their performance. If they were not so lucky, they were placed in a room with an examiner who delivered a really negative feedback that they performed painfully bad on this test. And then the examiner, on top of that, was trained to deliver this feedback in a way that sounded annoyed and incompetent to make the participants really angry. And in the third group, the same negative feedback was delivered in a warm and matter-of-fact way so that the participant liked their examiner and then felt ashamed. And well, maybe you won't be too surprised to learn that those who felt angry or ashamed has much higher heart response to stress than those who weren't. But something else, something that was not even discussed in this study, triggered my thinking. I was thinking, if such an unimportant thing as a feedback in a study where you voluntarily took part, and you even get $15 for your participation, no matter how you did, can cause such a strong effect in our heart, then what about the cumulative burden of the real day-to-day stress? What about traffic jams, rejected manuscripts, denied funding, What about lack of support, lack of promotion, rude or negative feedbacks from our peers, from our colleagues, from our bosses? Is our heart really made to maintain the level of shame and anger that we feel in the modern world? Well, this very thought came back to me when I was sitting in a class called Personal Foundation. And I took this class as part of preparation for running my own independent research group. So the task that we got there was to find 10 values or 10 guiding principles that we believe personally are the key to successful and happy life. And to help us out, our instructors gave us a long list of values to pick those 10 words from, and then rank order them from the least important to the mostest important. And after I completed this task pretty easily, I thought it's not a big deal. I was really surprised to see that some of my peers agonized over this same assignment and were coming up with only a couple of words. And one of them, we'll call him Kevin. No Kevin in the room? Okay. Had a seriously intense reaction. I noticed his flushed face, his fidgety fingers, and I noticed that he even looked over at his neighbors to see which words they selected. And Kevin felt so ashamed. And I was wondering, why in the world would someone in a group exercise where there are no right or wrong answers, but we are just asked to describe ourselves, feel such a level of uncomfort? So as it turned out, Kevin was trying to manage our perception of him. He was worried about picking the right values. Because if he picks money and wealth, will he come across as superficial? If he picks kindness and compassion, will we question his masculinity? Well, also he shared a lot about his kids, so the word family has to make it on this list, right? So I had this front row seat to Kevin's internal battle between what matters the most to him and the values he believes had to be on his list in order to avoid ridicule and show the rest of us that he's winning the game of life. And although I didn't have scientific vocabulary to name this battle in scientific terms, I figured that there's something really big going on, and it involves our values, shame, and anger. And as every scientist, my logical next step was to do an experimental study. So hundreds and hundreds of coaching conversations with people around the globe, nights and nights spent with those transcripts and datasheets and spreadsheets, my team and I finally had it. We do not operate on a single set of values, which then drive our thinking and our behavior. But within our value system, we have two completely different yet competing sets of values. And we call them now our core and our acquired values. Our core values are things that really, truly, intrinsically most matter to us. And I like to see those core values as our psychological DNA. So like our physical DNA, which then decides about our physical characteristic, our psychological DNAs carries the information about which values drive us from within and make us us. In contrast, acquired values are all those social expectations that are teaching us how to appear as worthy, as successful, as awesome human beings. And I like to see those values as some sort of a retroviruses messing up with our original files. And although they always start with a good intention, the problem occurs when we, like infected cells, spend too much time and energy and focus replicating the values that are not even our own, which leaves us with little left to give to those things that really matter to us. Now, when we described this concept, there were some questions to it, and we wanted to go into more depth. So the first question is, where do our acquired value even come from? So in our work, we could define many different sources, which we could organize in 3 different layers. And the first and the most influential and the most intimate one is our microenvironment. And we also realize that the very effective way to hack into this layer is to ask ourselves which parental advice stuck with us the most while growing up. And here are some examples from our clients. And we pick, for example, boys don't cry. If you were on the receiving end of this example, which kind of values would show up for you later in life? Self-reliance, toughness, strength, probably anything that is opposite to weak. We're also programmed on the level of our generation, and we acquire those generational values from our friends, teachers, media, and of course nowadays social media. And here I have an example for a typical social media for mid-millennials. And if these are the heroes of their time, and these are the messages that they spread, can we actually blame those youngsters for valuing fame and money and wealth as much as they do? Well, I'm with Jay-Z on this one. And finally, we are also programmed on a level of culture, because we are all born into the pre-existing matrix of values, which is so stable and so normal in our surrounding where we are growing up, that we don't even notice it anymore. It becomes our background. And it stays background as long as someone with a different background comes and challenges them. Like, for example, my husband did for me every single day. That's another TED Talk. The second big question is, why do we even listen to our acquired values? Well, the first thing is because we acquire them when we are so young that we are lacking the experience to know what sparks us from within. And the second part of this story is because those acquired values are strongly supported by all external iShoulds, which over time we internalize and they become iShoulds. They fight really hard and really aggressively for our attention. Something like this. And then finally, the most important question for us was, what does that have to do with our well-being and our heart? So in our study, we could demonstrate that those who obsessively focused on their acquired values lived a life full of peaks and valleys, meaning that indeed they could feel huge, intense spikes of satisfaction when they accomplished a goal based on their acquired value. But this spike would quickly fade away because it could only last as long as others' admiration for it lasts. On the other hand, those who were heavily invested in their core values experienced much deeper and much longer satisfaction, which over time accumulated and translated in better levels of well-being. And our latest finding hit me the hardest from a perspective of a heart scientist. We could show that those who are heavily involved with their acquired values feel more frequent and prolonged emotions of anger and shame, excessively but pointlessly burdening their hearts. So now what can we do about that? Well, I first tell you what you can't do. You can't hope for a magic book, a magic pill, a magic advice, a magic mushroom, or anything magic that can solve this for you. What we can do is we can tune into our thinking and understand which values are underlying our thoughts, our words, our behaviors, and our emotions, and ask ourselves, are they true to us? And over time, use this information and use our awareness to bring those four more to our core values. Because the truth is, whichever values you pick, you will never satisfy all social expectations, never ever. And you are going to disappoint someone. So just make sure it's not your future self. Thank you.